There we go. And back. Hello and welcome to the 12th in our 16-week series of audio-enabled EDA Step Workshop sessions. We're delighted you're here. Before we get started, my name is Annette and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. Before we get started, a few caveats. This session of the EDA Step Workshop is being recorded. We hope to make the audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audios will not be available on the EDA website until they've gone through the full vetting process. We will, however, be sending information about the recordings to the General Service Board email distribution list. If you're not currently on the GSB contact list, please drop a line to info@eatingdisordersanonymous.org and we'll get you added. A reminder, listening to a recording is not a substitute for attending EDA meetings or working with steps. We encourage you to check out our meetings pages, which include face-to-face, online, and teleconference meetings. Just like what you might find at an EDA group, what you're about to hear reflects experiences and opinions of individual EDA members that may or may not tally with your individual experiences. Please take what you can use and leave the rest. You do not need a sponsor to attend this workshop. We'll all be working the steps of EDA together, myself included. To make things easier for everyone, we've muted everybody as they join. If you'd like to be heard, please unmute your phone by using *6 or Alt-A if you're on a computer. You can mute and unmute using the same key combination, *6 or Alt-A. Because there's so many of us, we won't all get a chance to introduce ourselves. However, if you're speaking, please do tell us your first name and where you're from. Last week, we discussed oh, hang on, I missed a section here. We do hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'm really grateful that I had time in the plane traveling with my family to visit my mom in Florida to get caught up on the EDA Step Workshop homework. It helped me with the visit, and I was able to be grateful and happy throughout. Last week, we discussed Step 7. Bonnie, Leslie, Gisele, and I discussed why it's so important to recognize that our defects, the same characteristics that seem to cause us so much difficulty and pain, are in many cases the very same as our assets. Our characteristics, all of them, are a package that can be used to serve a greater purpose, whether that's God's will for you, the greater good, or whatever your higher power intends. Character building exercises help us learn that even the most distressing of our qualities can be leveraged to good end. Gisele, Ellen, Bonnie, and I spoke about our experiences with this step, and we covered some of the examples of what it means to reframe our thinking about our deficiencies, truly an important part of recovery so we can get out of our own way and recover. For instance, procrastination, laziness, and sloth can be seen as a defect, but efficiency research, as well as EDA experience, make clear that the ability to prioritize downtime is a wonderful boon to both personal growth and productivity. Leveraging this characteristic and ability to prioritize effectively to take care of basics and only do those things that are most critical is a huge benefit when we don't wallow in shame that we might not be meeting all of society's or even our own family's expectations. It's wonderful to set an example for our families and the next generation that is balanced and humble and permits downtime. Someone wrote in about struggling to find the value or the asset embedded in anger, which the AA text describes as the dubious luxury of more normal men. A response to this is that while dwelling in anger, living in it for long stretches is unhealthy and can make a difficult situation worse, anger is a normal human emotion. We all get angry. We'd hardly be human if we didn't have anger and fear. So what's good about anger if it causes so much trouble? Well, for one thing, it's a motivator. I wrote all this out. I know what I'm going to say, but still, I feel better if I've got my handy notes here. Anger exists to get us to do things, the things that will change us or change the world we live in. If no one got angry, we wouldn't have justice. We wouldn't have civil rights. We wouldn't have the Constitution of the United States of America either. Civil rights victories and the formation of our government were the result of people who had had enough of injustice. They used their anger to motivate change. There's another question about self-pity. What's valuable about that? I mean, yuck, right? Well, self-pity is certainly an unlovely feeling. Literally no one I know either enjoys feeling nor being with anyone else who is having a good wallow in it. Yet if we lacked self-pity, we wouldn't have empathy for anyone or anything. Self-pity is something like self-empathy. And we need to regard ourselves empathetically. So in that way, self-pity just signifies that we're willing to consider our own plight with kindness. Self-pity is not an evil curse. It's a good thing, a good capability in limited doses. Self-pity also suggests we should take stock and figure out how we should do better for ourselves, a good signal that we need to examine what we really need. So tonight we're moving ahead with step 8. If you're falling behind, please just do your best, do the next right thing, and hang in there. As always, remember, we're practicing a technique, a way of thinking, rather than striving for perfection. We can practically guarantee everyone will be feeling behind at some point in this workshop. It's a great opportunity to demonstrate flexibility and resilience. So tonight we'll reflect on how steps 4 through 7 inform step 8. We'll discuss the EDA Big Book, pages 179 through 181, which is a very short section, and we'll talk about our workshop worksheets, pages 28 and 29, harms done. We'll have a panel addressing a list of questions and answers on the step, and then we'll take step 8 together. After that, we'll review assignments for next week. Right now, I'd like to ask if there's anyone on the call who sponsors others in EDA to identify yourself so we may call on you during the question and answer session. Now, this doesn't imply that you currently are accepting new sponsees. However, if you are, that'd sure be great to know. So please tell us your first name and city.
I'm Gisele. I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder from Maricopa.
Hey, Gisele, thank you. *6 to unmute.
Oh, dear.
And recovery from compulsive. I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Hi, Marissa. I'm glad you joined. That was a very musical intro. It was really unintelligible, but that's Marissa from Seattle, Washington. Thank you so much.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, that was really weird, but great. I'm glad you're on the call. Do we have anybody else?
Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, and I'm in Phoenix.
Hi, Emily. Glad you're on. Thanks so much. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get started talking a little bit about step 8. So as we mentioned before, we talked a little bit about what our agenda tonight is. So the first thing we're going to kick off is kind of how steps 4 through 7 inform step 8. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Big Book sections, which is a really short section that talks about that too. Because, you know, when we made those lists of things like resentment and fear and self-pity and shame and guilt and all of these pieces that we use in step 4, those are our character defects, right? Those are the characteristics, the manifestations of how we regard ourselves in relation to the world, where things are kind of gone sideways. You know, we're thinking about things rather than in terms of what we're bringing to the party and how we can play well with others. We're thinking about how it didn't deliver for us, and you know, our expectations aren't getting met, or you know, we're all kind of sideways with things. Well, when we made the list of the people with whom we were frankly angry, or the people who were disappointing us or had done harm to us, or a lot of times those are the same people that we have done harm to as well. So step 4 tells us pretty directly areas in which, you know, we should, if we're feeling guilty because we've been neglectful, or feeling guilty because we've, you know, treated people poorly, those are obviously things that could potentially make it to step 8. Also, step 5, you know, we might have gotten feedback in our 5th step about things that we were heartily overlooking. I mean, I cannot tell you how many 5th steps I went through before I really realized how miserable I was to my husband. I thought it was all about me. No, so I got to tell you, you know, step 5 does help point out things and people for whom we've not been so great. And it also actually kind of balances things out, because sometimes I thought I was really being a cretin and not a very good daughter and not a very good family member in a lot of ways. And that actually wasn't a very balanced look at what I was doing either. So step 5 really helps provide detail. Step 6 and 7 In step 6, we're coming to grips with the fact that, even though we might have gotten some recovery and insight, we're still, like, even if you take the eating disorder out of it altogether, we're still people that have tons of problems, right? So impatience and, anxiety drives so much of me even now that it's kind of like, okay, my husband's already he's dialed into this. It's like, it's how Annette does, right? So it's all okay at one level, but at another level, it's really a terrible injustice. So 6 is still about, like, okay, I'm still all caught up with some of the same, it, aspects of my character that can be used for good or bad, but I'll be honest, they're not always good. So in step 7, I'm really focused on how am I turning this around and trying to leverage my things like impatience and anxiety to prompt me to do more of the right things instead of more of the wrong things. And that's part of how I'm going to use that result. Is like, so the areas in which I'm still the most stuck to help inform how I'm going to do repairs for damage done. So in step 8 is really about made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So if we look at pages 179 through, does anybody else have comments on 4 through 7 and how that gives us the list of persons to whom we might have done harm, or also give us some perspective on how to, sorry, there's work emails coming in. So that's all now being recorded on our thingy. Oh, great. Anyway, so does anybody else have thoughts that they'd care to share about how steps 4 through 7 help shed light on step 8? Okay. So I'll take silence as no. But as we look on page 179, the AA text tells us that we've already made a list of persons we've harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory, and that's about all it says about step 8. It's like super short. So EDA, of course, being a little more verbose, we go on for a few more pages. But really, what it's saying is that it's reflecting on the fact that we may be apprehensive about starting the step because we still feel like the same distressing emotions. Like, I have not actually forgiven my mother for some of the things that she does and says. When she says certain words, it's like fingernails on on blackboard. It just makes me. I still struggle with some of the phrases that I hear her use. And why? Because I still have feelings about them that are not productive. So I can't go through this and pretend like it's all perfect. It's sure as heck not. But these misgivings, like what I have about making amends, are normal. And it's unlikely that we're going to become so trained to our new ways of thinking that we won't harbor any troublesome feelings ever again. So really, it's more about, do I want to stay stuck in whatever emotion that is, or am I really willing to try something different? And so the question is, let me just read it because I think it sounds better than what I just made up. Do I want to stay stuck in self-pity, resentment, and fear, or do I want to walk free of these encumbrances? Hopefully, by working this step so far, we can affirmatively say, yep, I'm ready to walk away if only this could happen. Well, in step 7, we learned that we can just kind of walk away, focus on what's going right, focus on how we can use our attributes to be of service. And then we have to look at, well, what are we really accountable for? That's what we're doing in step 8. So when we look at step 4, we also saw how our own thinking created some of our misery. We looked at how judgment of others and expectations of others shared that misery with them as well. So we what we're doing here is we're really looking at how we take restorative action that addresses our errors of the past, but we're not working a step 9 yet. As we're going through this one more time, we're going to think of a long list. Not everybody that we've ever, done some kind of like thought badly about or judged or did some kind of injustice to that they don't know about actually injured them. And so step 8 is kind of like, you can list everything, but we're really going to hold it down to just those people that for whom we actually are guilty of something and for which we genuinely need to owe amends, or those with whom we have daily interactions to whom we probably need to make a living amend, which is a change in the way we comport ourselves and hold expectations and ideas about them in our minds. So we're not going to take a long time with step 8, but one of the key things is about, became willing to make amends to them all. Now, there's many people that struggle with this. You know, some of the people who have treated us the worst are the people that we have also treated the worst. So, you know, do we have to completely forgive them before we can be accountable for our own bad actions? And the answer is no. You don't have to forgive the people. You're accountable for your own actions, regardless of whether you're forgiving these other folks. You can always work on forgiveness, but our job is to be people of integrity. That doesn't mean you don't harbor any resentments. It doesn't. It does mean that you set right the wrongs that you've done to other people. So it says forgiveness brought us peace, yet perhaps we cannot forgive everything, and that sure as heck is true. And we can see oftentimes, though, that we were powerless in the grip of our emotions, and often those who did harm to us were as well. So when we think about how helpless we are in the face of our eating disorders when they're active, and we think even now about how we can get caught up in emotion, fear, pain, shame, you know, you think about all these people and the miserable ways that they treat others. They're really caught up in that same stuck cycle, and they're probably no happier about it than we were. So with that idea, we're going to talk briefly about the prayers. So there's a thing about step 8 that if you're really just not willing to move past that hardness of heart against somebody, it does mention in the AA text, and it does in EDA as well, that if we're not willing to make amends, we should at least be willing to earnestly think and hold those people against whom we have resentments or expectations, hold them in some kind of positive regard. Think about what they've done right, and earnestly pray or think about life delivering to them everything that they could possibly need, so that they feel needed and comforted and loved, so that the things that they earnestly need to make their life go right, that this happens for them. And so whether that means like envisioning this happening for them, that everything starts flowing correctly, thinking about the ways in which they're stuck and imagining that there are resolutions for these things, that actually will help move us past. You know, if we keep that up, I don't know if it gives it, if we keep up this daily practice for a while, we may find that even if we don't mean it when we start, we are going to end up meaning it by the time we're done with even just a few weeks practice of this. So that's my reflections, and I don't know if there's more. Okay, so here we have a few more things. So as we emerge from this step work with humility and with new energy to set right wrongs as we go along, so it's really critically important that we, even though we're really thinking about ourselves in a new way and maybe even other people in a new way, we're never really going to be done with this step. And so I don't want you to think that you're going to be one and done with this cycle of working the steps. The steps are a way of living. They're not just a way of like you do it once, and it's about getting perspective. But then I keep working the steps not because I need recovery from my eating disorder. I keep working the steps because it's like it makes me a human being that I don't mind being around. Okay, or at least not most of the time. All right, so I've done plenty of talking here. I'm going to just page on down. So it does talk a little bit about misgivings. Others might have harmed us more than we've harmed them. And so we talk a little bit there about the prayers, and that's, I do think that that's not an easy topic, especially for people that aren't people of faith. But it's important to remember that prayer is really a meditative process where we think about, you know, our time, our talents, our energy, and how we can apply those to serve the world better. And it may mean that taking these negative things, negative experiences that people have delivered to us, and committing ourselves to never being that way. So, I mean, I've had people that were so awful that they are just a wonderful example of how I don't want to react when something like that comes up for me. So even though I may not like them, I may not like what I felt, you know, I can definitely leverage those experiences for some positive outcome. And I can also think about, you know, what I would do or say were I to encounter them again. And I can think positively about, you know, that maybe like myself, other people are also growing and changing, that we're not all locked in a box. None of us are. Go ahead.
This is Gisele, and something I was thinking about when I was reading this again is, and I know for me, it's hard to go when I use myself as an example quite a bit, and it's looking at other people that have really harmed us and trying to figure out a way to move past them. I was molested by my brother, okay? And so it took me a long time to get out of that self-pity. And when it talks about in step 8 about the choice, we lose that choice. I have to gain that choice back. And I have that choice. And it took me a long time to understand that this wasn't a personal attack on me. This was from a sick person. This was from a sick person that had some things, and who knows, I had to set it in a place where, okay, this person had some things wrong with them, and it had nothing to do with me. They were acting out on their bad characteristics, bad behaviors, you know, and I, to this day, I left the door open for him to, you know, make amends, do something. He never did, but that's okay. I made my choice, and I forgave to a point where I can be in acceptance, and that's all I need to do. And the other examples, you know, when somebody rapes us, because I know a lot of us have had that happen, same thing. These were some sick ass people. And
You can quote that, yeah.
yeah, and I don't have any good feelings towards them, obviously, but this was not a personal attack on me. This was something that they acted out because they're sick, and that's the way I had to put it into terms where I could move on and be okay in my own skin, and that's my choice. I gained that power back. I no longer have to stay in that powerless, choiceless stage. I can move past that. And not that they're all good. They're not good. I don't view them with any good feelings. I just look at them as sick human beings, and that's it. And it takes a long time to get to that point, and you just have to keep working at it, and you have to know that you have that choice, and it's not a lost choice. I have to stay out of that self-pity and self-pity period, and move past that. And that's difficult, but it can be done. Many people have done it and are still going to do it. So anyway, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gisele. So does anybody else have reflections on the section, page 179 to 181?
This is Marissa. I'd just like to weigh in just a little bit on age. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, it's loud and clear now.
Okay, good. So what I'm thinking of is one of the things that I was taught in age was that, you know, this is a preparation step. I think a lot of people, they hear aid and they hear amends and they think, oh my God, I've got to do this. But it's really about becoming willing. It has nothing to do with making an amend. It has to do with willingness. And for me, that was really different when I was able to realize that I'm not making the amend today. All I'm doing is thinking about how willing I am. The other thing that was helpful for me was my sponsor said, you know, you can put them in 3 categories. You can look at these as, you know, amends I'm willing to make right now, amends I might be willing to make at some point in my life, and amends that I will never make no matter what. And it was interesting how those shifted through, you know, more step work, and the ones that were in the 3rd column ended up being made over time. So just not panicking and being overwhelmed by something that just feels impossible, knowing that I had choices. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Marissa. That was wonderful. Gisele's like, thank you so much.
I forgot about that. That was an awesome example. I forgot about that. That's
wonderful.
Perfect.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm Emily. I'll go ahead and chime in.
Sure.
All right. Well, there was a couple things that came to mind in this part of the reading. Like you said, it is pretty short. So on 179, where you mentioned these distressing emotions that still come up, and then it says here, but when they do come up, we put ourselves somewhere safe and consider the following question: do I want to continue to stay stuck in self-pity, resentment, and fear, or do I want to walk free of these encumbrances? And so a lot of that has been echoed in my personal experience with the 12-step program and in EDA. I had somebody phrase it for me once, like, the way they look at it is it worth it? Like, yes, you may have a perfectly justified reason for totally thinking this person is like an asshole and not wanting to forgive them and not wanting to like ask for the willingness to forgive them either. But I think one thing that's super important to remember is that we're working these steps for ourselves. This decision has actually nothing to do with them really. And we're not making amends yet, but when we think about the willingness to make the amends, I think it's always important to remember like it's for our own recovery that we're doing this, so that we don't go back into behaviors that we're doing this. So it's sort of like, yes, it's really hard to even be willing to let go of resentment sometimes, but it's like, if we want, how free do you want to be, you know, which is another phrase I've heard a lot. And then on 181, when it talks about, you know, when we feel empathy for the people on our list, even if we do not like their behavior, we may be ready to move on to step 9. You know, and other people that suffer from thoughts that create pain and misery just like we do. Something kind of related to that my sponsor had me do several times, which was really enlightening, was to go through my resentment or go through, you know, this list of people that I had come up with in step 4. And for the ones that were more troubling and that I was having a harder time, you know, the ones that would go in that 3rd column, like never going to make amends, I would have to think of an example of something I did that was, you know, not necessarily specifically the same as what they did to me, but the same in essence, you know, the same motivation. And I found that like a huge perspective shift, which I think is what the steps are all about, like shifting our perspective. And even if it didn't make me like what they did, it meant that I could no longer see it as an us and them situation. It was more like a humanity situation. So it helped me release some of that anger, which, you know, we were talking about anger earlier. It is important, but it also feels so good to like be able to let it go and not hold on to it anymore. It's a very freeing experience. So with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Emily. That was wonderful. So glad you joined. So we're now going to move on to let's see. We're going back to the brainstorming list when we go make our step 8. We jot down names and damages on page 28. So if you haven't done that yet, we'd like to encourage you to do it as we're going through some of these questions. We should take into account financial impacts, effects on property. So if you regularly had to get plumbers in to deal with stuff that affected, if you had to be hospitalized, that affected people's emotional health as well as other things. Any kind of social or corporate standing, slander, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical injury, lies, negligence, and withholding of familial, or spousal love. So we suggest with starting with the asterisk entries. Remember, you went through 8 different pages making lists of things and asterisking the ones that were the most, red hot when you were thinking about them. So the main thing, though, is that we stop at 15. It's really important not to blow this out of proportion. We want to focus on getting this list together. And, in the process of attacking our 4-step from 8 different angles, you're going to see there's a lot of redundancy. Again, you're focusing on the people, against whom you've probably had the greatest set of judgments or expectations, which tends to give rise to a lot of the material that causes us distress. So 15 entries is all we're asking about. So here we now have a list of questions that either people have written in about or have talked to me about in the past. Step 8, becoming willing. And so here's our list of questions. The first question is from somebody that says, I was abused as a child. I'm conflicted and heartsick when I think about forgiveness, let alone amends. And I heard my mother when she defended the abuser instead of me, and I can't seem to forgive her, try as I might. I just see black when I think about all of this. I can turn my thoughts to how I can use my experiences to help others. When it comes to my family, I just feel stuck, not even remotely willing. What am I supposed to do with all this? All right, panelists, let's have at it. What would you suggest to this person? Come on.
Oh man, I can chime in. It's Emily.
Go for it.
Okay. well, I feel like it's related to kind of what I was just saying. I think being able to remember the bigger picture, that that when we are holding on to this anger, you know, and like it doesn't always feel like a choice, and I can totally empathize with that. It's like, you know, we don't control our emotions. It's not like I can just be like, you shouldn't feel anger, it's unhealthy for you, so, you know, stop. Because I try that and it doesn't work.
Yeah, just say no.
Yeah, exactly. Just in case you know, you wanted to try out yourself, don't. But I do feel like for me, and this is coming from somebody who, you know, has a struggle with a higher power and, you know, is constantly on this journey of searching and discovering as to what that means to me. I find that a really great place to start is prayer. Because just like at the, you know, throughout this process, praying for the willingness to be willing, sometimes going so far as to add like 6 willingnesses on there if I have to, has been what has gotten me through a lot of the time, because it's meeting me where I'm at. And it's saying, you know, I'm not willing, but I pray for the willingness to be willing to forgive this person, because there's these people telling me who've been here before that if I do this and I work towards this, I'm going to get better from my eating disorder. And they've done it before me, and I'm trusting that, you know, this is a better way for me. So I think it can be extremely hard. And I think especially like no one's asking anyone to go make amends to someone who abused them, you know, in an unsafe environment. Like that's why step 8 is totally different. I think it's important to remember that when we forgive, it's an internal process, and it can be totally about us. It doesn't have to be about them. So I think that makes sense. I'll pass.
Thanks, Emily. Anybody else on the first question? So if not, I'm going to chime in on that a little bit. In situations where you've been molested, and especially as a child, but even as an adult, it isn't right or appropriate to necessarily feel like you must forgive them. I think that's a wonderful ideal. I think it's fantastic if people can attain that. But don't set that as an expectation for yourself. I mean, for Pete's sakes, you know, you've been, you know, the subject of a crime. This is not some trivial thing. It's a big stinking deal, you know, and anybody that colluded in covering it up, anybody that, you know, they really deserve to go to jail. You know, so is it something that you would necessarily want, you know, your mother, your father, your uncle, your, you know, some person in your family or somebody that you knew go to jail? Well, it depends. Are they still an active threat to others? If they are, the most kind thing you can do for anybody is to make sure that the appropriate authorities are alerted. And so, and it is actually, it's about, you know, using that experience, your own experience, to serve the greater good. And, you know, I know that a lot of folks are doing that. So, you know, if for instance, if you take the Olympic athletes and what they've been doing by bringing things out into the public's sphere, it's actually really important, because if we don't call people on the miserable things that they do to each other, if we don't use that anger and that sense of shame to some good purpose to save others, then we're actually wasting an opportunity to use these really troubling emotions in a way that I think that they're actually makes sense. So it's really all about making things make sense. If this is, you know, for those who are of people of faith, I mean, this is a God-given kind of thing. And my hope is that you feel comforted if you're a person that's been the subject of abuse or molestation, whether that's verbal or physical. There is good that can come out of this. That doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that that those experiences weren't valuable. And then also the forgiveness. It's like you can make amends to people without forgiving them. I just wanted to reiterate that. Okay. And do you need to make amends to an abuser? Is a different question. No. And the answer is actually no. You take what you would normally do as an amends. If you were mean to, say, supposing you were mean to an uncle who abused you. Now you're an adult and you have you actually stole from them, or I mean, I don't know, I'm making this up now, but in many cases we do retaliate against people who have been horrible, and we may still really feel guilty. Do we do anything to repay the person? No, all that does, and we'll talk about this more with step 9, but there really isn't a need to make amends to them directly. There is a need to make amends for your error. Your error was theft, okay? And so to make amends directly to the person that was abusive may just appear to be condoning that behavior or making it acceptable, which it isn't. So and this is specifically true in the cases of crimes. If there are other situations, if you yelled at somebody and they were mean to you, you still owe an amends. Sorry, it doesn't get you off the hook for everything, but for some things you might just need to, like if you stole something, then you might want to give that to charity, to a battered domestic violence shelter, or some other similar sort of thing that absolves you to a certain extent of the guilt, but isn't necessarily condoning behavior that we know is wrong, if there is no other recourse through which it can be addressed. Okay, I think I beat that one to death. Okay, next one. So Gisele, you want to read it?
When it was life or death with my eating disorder, I worried and disappointed a lot of people. I was unapologetic about money spent trying to help me. I didn't want the help. It angered me. Now that I am in recovery, I feel guilty about all the time, money, and energy people, especially my parents and siblings, exhausted trying to save me. I am pretty sure worry about me cost my sister a scholarship and my mother a relationship with someone who probably would have been great for her. Do I owe amends to them? Should I even be concerned with choices other people made about what to do with their time and money?
That's a great question.
That is.
Anybody on the phone?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I struggle a lot with this kind of question, a lot. Oh, I should probably introduce myself. My name's Jovina. I'm from California. So I hear a lot of times that having an eating disorder is just like having any other kind of mental illness, that a lot of times it's not your choice, just like some people can be clinically depressed or have bipolar disorder, that having an eating disorder is completely out of our hands. And I definitely do not have the answer to this, but it's something that confuses me all the time, because I do feel guilt, because, I mean, I guess it is a choice, whether you eat or don't eat, binge, purge, all of that, I guess it is a choice. But I'm very confused as whether it's like any other kind of illness, like having the flu, where it's out of your hands.
Great. So that's a great comment. And I think that the answers are pretty consistent. And it does talk about this really in step 9. So this is kind of teeing that up a little bit. But yeah, you know what? Oftentimes, without really intending to, we have ruined other people's lives. There's really just no getting around it. But what is really the amends for that? And what does it mean to become willing? This is about becoming willing. So if we're willing to look at our part and how we've affected the lives of other people, and where it hasn't necessarily gone well for them, and it's pretty traceable back to our own behavior and our own insufficiency to manage ourselves properly as adults. Are we responsible for trying to repay that to the people in our lives? And the answer is yes. And okay, so it's kind of, our job, if you think about what our family members really want it's for us to be healthy. It's for us to be whole and to be free and to have opportunities and to carry on and to be grateful. And so the amends in most cases there is really just about recovering and making use of their investment of time, energy, love, and misery to good end. It's like, show them that it was worth it. It's like, that's the main thing. Are you willing to recover, because that could actually deliver, that could make it all worth it for them in the end. So think about that. Because really, if you are able to recover and stay in recovery and you're grateful for their presence in your life, that is probably the best that your parents certainly and your siblings could possibly get. So just focus on doing the next right thing. And, you know, if you've treated them badly, that's a different question. But in terms of money and what they've chosen to do with their time, their worry, you don't, it's correct. It's like you were ill. If you were in the hospital because you had, you know, some kind of horrible temporary disease, Ebola or whatever, you would have created a lot of havoc. Is it your fault that you had Ebola? And the answer is no. Maybe you
Right.
went to a part of you went visiting someplace and you shouldn't have, and maybe you could have not touched something, but realistically, you know, we're human beings and we're going to have trouble, and they're going to have trouble. They're going to have medical expenses, and you're going to be there for them too. So that's my 2 thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I had this kind of happen. I can make living amends, but sometimes people get overly involved in my life. Sometimes they got overly involved in for their own character defects of manipulation and control, you know. And so I can make my amends, and I can make my living amends, but I can't control how much they lost or did. I can't control that. But it's just making that living amends. I don't have control on that outside stuff.
What? Sorry, can you repeat that? Side comment. Okay. So next question. I don't have a great relationship with my father, and I don't want a relationship with him. He's an awful person. I know I'm supposed to make amends because I hurt him a lot in a lot of different ways, but part of me is perfectly content letting sleeping dogs lie. How do I become willing to make amends when I'm convinced that whatever I say or do will be rejected? And there's no part of me that thinks that doing this for the sake of doing it will do anything other than make me more vulnerable to attack.
Mostly just fried rice.
Not just from my father, but from my stepmother and possibly even other family members.
There's noodles.
Please mute
I
yourself.
had that for lunch. It was
Sorry,
good.
we're going to try to mute you. Got people talking about fried rice. Okay. Hold on just a second. So I'm going to mute everybody, and then you'll have to unmute yourself. Hang on. Okay, so to unmute, *6. Can anybody speak to this?
Hi, this is Connie.
Hi, Connie. Please go ahead.
Is it okay to, I'm not like a sponsor or anything. I wasn't sure if that's okay to still
Sure.
answer. So in my experience, like I was also really confused about this question for a long time before my recovery. And what really helps me, the way I look at this, is that there are certain actions that are unforgivable and they're never going to be forgivable. And for me, amends is not I forgive the actions. It's understanding the more that I heal myself and I take care of like my traumas and my abuse and understand myself, the more I understand other people and like where they're coming from. And just because like people hurt people. And so when people that abuse, they're very hurt themselves. They were very abused themselves. Otherwise they wouldn't act that way. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but if I could be really angry about the behavior and hurt forever about the behavior because that's just human nature. At the same time, like understand where they're coming from when I'm ready. And it takes a lot of work for me to get to that place. And I don't believe that a person should ever, I don't feel like amends is something that could ever be forced or a decision. I think that it comes through healing when the person's ready. And I feel for me, when people say you should forgive or forgive, like that makes me not want to forgive because like that feels very like judgmental. When I'm ready to feel differently or less angry or want to have anything to do with this person, then I will. And if I don't, and that's fine. But I feel like for me, I guess I look at the amends more as like an understanding, but not as forgiving the actions. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
That's perfect. Thank you, Connie.
And I just want to make a note. I thought of something right when you were talking, and a lot of the reason why we want to get to the point where we have that willingness to try and make an amends in step 9 is because of what it does to us. When I have a lot of anger and all that ucky feeling inside of me, it's going to come out. I don't care who you are. It's going to come out, and it's going to come out sideways. And so that's why I need to pray and pray for that willingness to be willing. That's my first step, because that stuff that I'm holding on inside, I may not be ready now, but I need to get myself ready at some point and do the work, because that stuff comes out sideways. I almost lost my job at one point because I had that stuff coming out sideways. And so I had to do some work pretty quickly because it was coming out sideways, and it was just stuff I hadn't worked on yet. So anyway, that's all I got.
Gisele, that's perfect. Thank you. And this does keep coming up. It's like the stuff that we haven't quite resolved, it's going to make it out sideways.
It's going to come out.
No kidding. All right, next question. Help. I'm still angry at my spouse for being controlling and disrespectful when I was active in my eating disorder. Now, I understand why she was that way, and I know it's really my fault, but now I can't trust her, and somehow I'm not willing to let go of that. So much shame in not being able to forgive this. Sponsors, how would you respond to this?
Well, I think that the whole thing about forgiving it is a little twisted, because I don't think you should need to forgive somebody for really just wanting you to be safe and happy. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I just feel like we have to remember that their main goal is just to keep us here and keep us healthy. And so, the whole part of trusting them, I think that you can trust them to make sure that you're okay. I mean, of course, there's going to be a part where you have to learn how to be comfortable around them because of them pushing. But I think that sometimes being pushed is what we need.
That's a great answer. How about somebody else?
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sure, it's Emily. Was it about her mother? I missed the beginning.
Spouse.
Oh, it's about her spouse. Okay, well, I suppose it doesn't really matter.
You can totally change
Yeah, exactly. It's just a person. I think I can speak to that. I think that, Emily, I'm from Phoenix, and, I don't know, I think that one thing that we learn by going through the steps, or one thing that I've learned by going through the steps, is how my reactions in situations, because of being overwhelmed by my emotions, are not always like the best behavior that I could put out there, to say the least. And so if that's true for me, then it's definitely going to be true for other people. But it's also important to remember that, like, rarely am I ever intentionally trying to hurt someone. And the same is true for them. And I think it can get really tricky when it's someone you care about and you have empathy for the fact that they were scared and that they were, worried about you. And so, but you're still, you have your own emotions, about, like I think you mentioned, the person mentioned being, their spouse being over controlling and stuff like that. And I think there's space to express all of that, and to do it in a way that, acknowledges, like, getting out of our own selves enough to acknowledge what the other person was feeling and, like, what part we played in that, and taking responsibility for that. And then also being allowed to say how we felt and where we were at in that place. And, and I think sharing and, like, talking about it and getting it out there and, is a lot, and, like, clearing the air and stuff is a lot of what this is about, so that it's not, I feel like, just like the inventory, you have to be very thorough, and sort of not hold anything back, and just do the best you can with what you have. So I hope that made sense. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Emily. So this last question is that this isn't any different from if you imagine somebody that is a terrible drunk, an alcoholic that is, unable to hold a job, and you know what, in positions like that, I mean, if you look through the AA text, it's rife with situations where, the spouse had to go, work and slaved and did all these things and, took care of the house and, took care of the kids and, and here's the alcoholic just, completely like not a contributor. And then there's situations like that, or situations where if you've got an eating disorder, you're an adult, but you're behaving like a child and you're needing to be taken care of like a child, you're going to have a difficult time with, people respecting you as an adult. You're going to have a difficult time with these people that, if you were an alcoholic and you had children and, they are heartily disrespectful of you by the time you sober up. And same thing with an eating disorder. If you were somebody that had an eating disorder, your kids may not look at you as somebody they can trust to give them any kind of guidance on many issues. So what do you do if they don't regard you with respect and they don't, or, you've got a situation with the spouse where they're like, yeah, you're not making any decisions about this stuff. I've got it, and that can feel terrible. But the reality is we've got our part in that and they don't have to respect us. They don't have to try to not control us. We just are responsible for our part of the relationship because it's a current relationship. Do our part, lean on God, walk with others. It's like, look for what's good about what they're doing. Look at how the circumstances have led them to have to step up, to overstep up in order to make life manageable for everybody. So forgiveness is actually kind of called for under those circumstances because you know what, that's going to keep coming. That's a gift that'll keep giving. And our role is to look at that with empathy and to try to recognize that, no, we are people that don't, we aren't to grovel before anyone. We don't have to apologize. We just have to, shoulder our part and, and work toward the common goals, the goals of the family. It's like, do your part and let everything else go. Focus on what's going right. That really works. I had a situation that looked like this, and it really helped to remember that I'm not responsible for the way they think or act, but most of the time it's me responding to them in ways that are reactive when their patterns were built up over years and my lack of proper behavior. We're going to move on. So thank you everybody for contributing to the panel. So we are actually going to, I think I've moved up one too many here. Hold on. Nope, I didn't. But there is actually more than just the assignments for next week. So one of the things we're going to do is look at the worksheets. And so we talked about the worksheets, and then I don't have a slide for them. But on page 28, it describes how to do a step 8. And on page 29, we actually work it. So the key thing here is to list the top 15 and the damage that's done. So we're not really looking at amends. We're just looking at like not holding back on how we've affected other people in ways that hurt them. So, if you thought something mean, but you didn't say it, you don't have to list that. You really have to list the things that really you've said that damage somebody, you don't have to go back through. If you've done these before, just focus on the stuff that happened since the last one. You don't have to go all the way back in your history. Okay, so we're going to take a couple of minutes. So does anybody have any questions about how to do that step 8 stuff? I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to talk about step 8 also.
Hello, this is Lee. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So, and this is always confused me that with the step 8 is, and I've worked the steps before in other programs, and the people I have on my list now that I have harmed, I don't have resentments about them. So they weren't necessarily on my 4th step. Does that make sense? I mean, it's, it always says on the 8th step, go back to your 4th step and take on the people there. And then it sort of refers you back to the people you have resentments about. Well, I haven't necessarily harmed the people I resent. And the people I harmed, I don't necessarily have resentment about them. Does that make sense?
Yes, but that's why the EDA 4th step includes one on guilt. So,
yeah, well, that's nice that it does. So just but to throw that out there, because I think if you're doing this the first time, that might be confusing.
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead.
If it's somebody you've harmed, you probably do feel some level of guilt or some shame over the fact that you responded to people in a way that hurt them. So
I do,
but are also, and even despair. So, it's like I'll use. I have a child over whom I regularly do hand wringing kinds of things because they seem really stuck, and I don't know how to help them, and there's this and that, and so there's a lot of despair and frustration related to that person. And when I think that in many cases, I respond to perfectly innocent statements issued by said child in ways that are irritable, in ways that basically are like, I've written you off, I'm tired of this interaction, and it really basically reinforces the negative self-image that they might have of themselves. Is that doing harm? Yeah, actually, it really is. And so when I look at how I respond to the people in my life, if I'm responding with kindness and warmth and love, I'm not harming them. Even if I say things that they don't want to hear, if it's coming from a place of empathy and it's coming from, it's offered respectfully, that's not harming them, regardless of what I say. But when it's coming with irritation and anger and impatience, it does. And so, my son made my list for critical judgmental. I treat him like a child because he behaves like one, but it's the thing is, I just put because. I treat him like a child. Does that hurt him? It does. I'm untrusting of him. It undermines his self-confidence. I treat him like he's not trustworthy, and he actually is. And I'm miserly. I'm constantly upset with them because of a set of reasons, but I'm miserly about it. And when I think, what does that really teach somebody? It tells them that they're not worth much. So does that hurt him? You betcha it does. So, I only have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people on my list of 15, but it goes on actually substantially longer than the 15 lines, because I have multiple ways in which I've hurt these people. So please don't feel like does all of that show up on my 4-step? No, probably not. I know there's one big topic that didn't show up on my 4-step at all this time, but it's just a constant thing that so it probably should have. Anyway, so other questions? We have a few more minutes. All right. Well, listen, I do hope that you're all willing to engage in this step. I'd like us to all take it together. So if you're ready to take step 8, which is a commitment to becoming willing to make amends, then please, on the count of 3, let's say it together. 1, 2, 3. Became willing to make amends. Yeah. So it's actually made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to
make amends.
Woo! Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Oh, wow. All right. So our assignments for next week are preparation for step 9. And this one now is a little bit longer. So we're going to do Workshop Worksheets pages 30 and 31. Read step 9 in the EDA Big Book, pages 182 to the top of page 86 of page 186, including the 9th step promises on page 185. So this is really where some of the promises start happening. It's like once you're actually working the amends, before you're halfway through is what the AA text tells us. And that sometimes is true. You're going to see significant changes. Make a list of amends that you can make in the next 2 weeks and get started. So that's kind of the chore for next week, because that can be a really scary place. If you're scared and feeling lost, overwhelmed, bring it next week, talk about it, talk to other people in programs about it. This part is not any different for EDA than it is for any other program. All right, so also please do look ahead to step 10. If you haven't already started step 10, many people do start right after step 3, but if you haven't prepared for step 10, go ahead and read the EDA Big Book starting from page 186 and up to halfway through 192. And then there's a single page, page 498, and a set of pages 517 to 521. And that is a wrap. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you have a brilliant week, and we'll look forward to talking to you in 7 days. Have a great one. Take care.
Right on.
Bye-bye. Okay.